Good morning, everyone. Yes, Marty, there is a PowerPoint. We're going to be pulling that up very shortly. Good morning.
Yes.
Yep, I can hear you. Yep. Hi. Good morning. Let me make sure you're. Can you hear everybody, Napoleon, or can you hear me?
I hear you just fine.
Okay, perfect. Well, why don't we go ahead and get going? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. We want to thank you so much on behalf of ComNetwork Detroit for joining us this morning for our November meetup. We hope you find this very beneficial. It'll be some good information. We want to make this interactive. So if you have any questions or any comments for our wonderful panelists this morning, please put them in the chat, and we want to make sure we get to your questions at the end. And again, thank you so much for bearing with us. We had a slight glitch, but we're here, we're up and going now. So without further ado, I want to introduce our wonderful speaker. So Mr. Napoleon Harrington, who is with the Ambassador Counseling and Resource Group. He's a therapist, speaker, and also an adjunct faculty member as well. So Napoleon, the founder and therapist of Ambassador Counseling and Resource Group, a collaborative counseling organization which is dedicated to providing people and professionals with proficient counseling and training services. Upon earning his bachelor's degree from the Oakland University, go Grizzlies, he was awarded the Human Relations Award, a significant honor given to one of the graduating seniors at Oakland University. Napoleon is an engaging presenter with national experience, and he has been a keynote speaker for multiple occasions, ranging from university convocation and commencement exercises to professional conference experiences. In 2012, he was awarded the Adjunct Faculty of the Year Award for his academic and professional contributions to his colleagues and the undergraduate student body. Napoleon's leadership has been recognized by civic organizations and government officials. And in 2016, he was inducted into the 5th class of the Elite 40 Under 40 of Oakland County by the late County Executive L. Brooks Patterson. He recently has been inducted as an alumni and class president of the 28th class of the Leadership Oakland, a nationally recognized premier leadership program. He is the immediate past president of the Michigan Mental Health Counselors Association, and in that role, Napoleon was instrumental in the passage of legislation that rescued the licensed professional counselor from a detrimental and uncertain future. Napoleon was named Clinical Mental Health Counselor of the Year in 2020 by the American Mental Health Counselors Association. Napoleon's life experiences have inspired him to be a voice of courage for people facing a variety of fears and challenges. He has been featured as a health expert for multiple media outlets to discuss mental and behavioral health and psychology-related topics. He has written multiple articles for national and local publications on topics related to mental health and wellness, and he has a passion for people and has made it his mission to cultivate optimum mental, physical, and spiritual well-beings of those he comes in contact with. Napoleon is affectionately known as the Courage Counselor. He lives in Auburn Hills, Michigan with his wife, Faith, and his 2 adorable twin girls, Isabella and Amani. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Mr. Napoleon Harrington.
Well, thank you very much for that. I'm always unnerved when I have to listen to the introduction. My mother would be remarkably happy that it was all said, and she'd say, "You better tell him you're my son too." So I want to make sure I add that in there. I am also Carolyn Harrington's son. So thank you everybody for being here today. It is a distinct honor to be able to present on a topic that I am deeply affectionate about, something that I love to have conversations about in not only my work time, but certainly also in my spare time, because there is a very critical conversation that is on the table today, and it's all about mental health. And mental health is probably one of the best and most important conversations that we should be having in this particular time. Not that it's never been important, but it is that much more important these days. So thank you very much, ComNet, for the invitation. Chiara, thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. I really appreciate you choosing me to be able to talk to you today about such a critical topic. So as we move forward, next slide, there are definitely some very important conversations or pieces to this conversation that we've got to be able to have. And number one, we've got a very short amount of time to do a very significant work. And when I say a significant work, mental health, there are entire schools of thought dedicated to mental health, and literally entire buildings and universities have programs that focus on mental health and how mental health plays out for particular populations. But we're going to take a broad topic and try to squeeze it into the miniature size. I know we just passed Halloween, and for those of you who passed out the really big Snickers, you are champions. If you handed out the really fun size ones, today's going to be a fun size Snicker, if you will, in terms of our topic. So there are three aims that we have for today, and the first of them being, we want to increase our awareness of mental health and emotional wellness and the effects on our overall health. It is very important to pay close attention to what our mental health is and the impact of what our mental health and emotional wellness will be. Oftentimes people will hear the term mental health, and what registers is the first thing they're thinking is diagnosable challenges or diagnosable disorders. And that's, it'll sound like we're splitting hairs, but it's not necessarily the main conversation. Mental health is about what you have the capability to do. So that's one of our first aims today. The second, it's really important also to speak to the sensitivity, heighten our sensitivity to the power of occupational burnout and the effects of media cycles, because you all are, believe it or not, among the front line of defense when it comes to consumption of information, distribution of it, and as well as managing that information. And not just in general times, we are in what has been dubbed affectionately as acute stress-oriented times. So we want to heighten our sensitivity to the power of occupational burnout. And we will have strategies towards the end of the discussion to make sure that you stay healthy, because that is critical. We need to make sure that you stay healthy, because a healthy self for self allows for a healthy self for everyone else. Last but not least, we're going to share in best practice and strategic solutions that help to address information burnout and maintain professional effectiveness. Many of you have strategies that we will give you the opportunity to share, whether it be by chat or whether it be by discussion overall, but we definitely have the opportunity to share in best practice and solution. I will be giving at least the mental health perspective, and some of you will be able to, as communication professionals, be able to share more intimately what kind of things you could do as communication professionals. I did add an element in there toward the end about information management and what kind of strategies you can do. But so just bear with me, because many of you probably have tons of those implemented already, and we'll have the invitation at the end for you to share in question or in other stages of that. So those are our three aims today. And we'll move to the next slide.
Oh.
All right, so this is probably here primarily for the optics. When you see this, I'm telling you that there are some things that we do not or did not anticipate happening when it came to this year. This word here, change, is probably one of the most difficult words for any human being to deal with. There's been scientific research that's been done across a variety of different spectrums, and every research orientation that you can think of or background, what they've come up with is that the difficulty that people have with change is based or rooted in three different areas. One of them is uncertainty, and uncertainty is something that people just have a very difficult time trying to manage because you can't anticipate what's next. The second is fear. Of course, with uncertainty, there's this idea of perhaps being unprepared for what's to come. And if you're unprepared for what's to come, then that could create that fear. And then last but not least, there's this idea of not feeling, having the ability to manage it. So when we think about change, this is something that's really difficult for all of us. We're creatures of comfort. We like to do things as normally and regularly as we can. And I've been cautioned based on tons of things that I've read that one of the most difficult places for a person to live is within their comfort zone. So living in your comfort zone does not help you with the development of the attitude for change that we will need. This next slide is really interesting, and Time Magazine did a kind of a reach out to folks because they wanted to understand what life was like when things were very normal. And so in your chat, if you will, we'll give you an opportunity to get engaged. Oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, there'll be a final exam, so make sure you stick around for the final. Kidding. That can cause some fear as well. So when life felt normal, I want you to write down in the chat box, we'll take about a minute to do so. Write down in the chat box, what do you miss about your pre-pandemic, pre-social crisis, pre-politics life? Things have changed dramatically. What do you miss about that life? There are things that we used to do almost regularly, and things have changed to the degree that we can't do them as regularly as we used to. I've got one from Sherry. She says, hugging my family and friends. Yeah, that's a huge one, Sherry. Traveling, mindless shopping at the mall, just having a normal drive, missed lunches with colleagues, casual work lunches. You guys like the people you work with. Going to large events like concerts. Yes, I missed like 4 concerts this year. Having people over for festive meals. Now that's Thanksgiving's coming up. Movies, absolutely. Ron Rosento, movies. It's interesting to see that we've got things that are happening in our lives that we've been pulled away from, and we're not actually having the ability to do anymore. It's really interesting that we have had to shift the nature of our lives in a way that was really difficult. So I'm glad thank you for participating, because there are tons of things that we miss from our pre-pandemic life. To go forward one slide, I had one anticipation this year and probably for the next 18. In February of this year, I had the pleasure of becoming the father of Imani Joel and Isabella Jolie Harrington. Now, this was, if you notice the date, 2 weeks toward the pandemic, before things went into quarantine. We were getting rumblings around this time frame about things becoming as difficult or as bad as they were, or cases coming up. And the only thing that was on my mind was becoming their dad and doing the best that I could with that respect or with that regard. But what happened was the prior slide I just showed you, which was the slide of change. And when change happens, change creates a very, very unsettling and unnerving situation for people, and they're trying to figure out how to manage or negotiate their way through change. Around this time, we only thought it was going to be about 2 weeks that we would be in quarantine, but instead, here we are, months later, still trying to manage and prepare for even a resurgence of said situations. So I wanted to just kind of add a personal piece to this to let you know, number one, these two are the most adorable people I've ever met. And they behave precisely like their mother, and they look like her. She's great. And I wanted to add that in there, but it was also probably one of the most stark realities that I had to come to in a short amount of time, that going into a pandemic, change was about to take place in a tremendous way. When change happens and people don't necessarily have the ability to address that change, it becomes really critical for people to try to manage the stress that comes to that change. Now, I could have you raise your hands and push gallery view and have you raise your hands to see who deals with change really, really well. And the research would bear out that out of the number of participants that we have today, that less than about 10% feel great about the ability to deal with change. And all of us, when dealing with change, have to deal with some level of stress. When stress gets mismanaged or becomes overwhelming, we find ourselves in a situation where we may not necessarily be able to manage that stress as healthily as we can. Then we start to experience mental health issues that could be created by the onset of stress and perhaps unmanaged stress. And I want you to just kind of pay attention to a couple of these stats that are going to be sprinkled throughout this presentation. Some may not catch you by surprise. Some may catch you by surprise. Like, for example, even in 2020, 1 in 5 people will experience some type of mental health issue. Now, my colleagues and other institutions are doing research and suggesting that that number post introduction to pandemic, we are going to see an influx in that number, and we're going to be having to pay attention to what that looks like. One of the most common diagnoses that are starting to enter clinicians' offices based on rough estimates and numbers that have been produced so far, the most common, depression, anxiety, and then the next one is adjustment disorder. Again, adjusting to change is very difficult. And when that kind of change is imposed on you, it creates a layer of stress that we never could have considered. Mental illnesses are more common than cancer, diabetes, and heart disease. Let that one sink in for a second. It's more common than cancer, more common than diabetes, more common than heart disease. Of course, it also has the greatest stigma out of each of those. 1 in 25 will experience a serious mental illness that will substantially impact their work performance and mess with their ability to function in life, influence their quality of life. Substance abuse and alcoholism will impact about 1 in 10 people. Now, that seems like it's a relatively low number, but I will say this, what we've noticed during pandemic, research suggests, or early reporting suggests, that there are rises when it comes to alcoholism. Even with bars being shut down, alcohol sales are going through the roof. There are a lot of folks who are not necessarily managing as well and turning to other methods of coping in order to address this. And unfortunately, one of the most sobering statistics that are here is that somewhere nearly half of all people considered taking their life at some point. And when hopelessness starts to settle in as a result of stress, etc., I think it is important to make sure that we focus on developing some level of hope or improving the quality of life for individuals. Next slide. Now, to bring it to a little bit more of a macro focus, what statistics are saying about how things are happening within our pandemic, the economy is now a significant source of stress for 70% of Americans. Now, I know that even the folks who are well-to-do are worried about how the markets are looking and how the economy will recover. I realize that now with the regime change, when it comes to our political standings, no one has any clear idea how the economy is going to look and how it may recover. I had a really good friend who's in finance tell me that the economy is just like the weather. And economists are oftentimes like weathermen or people who are meteorologists. They predict certain patterns, and if it happens, it happens. And if it doesn't, well, they saw the clouds, but it just didn't rain. The other important conversation here is the government's response to the crisis. And this is not just pandemic, but this is also social crisis. It's causing stress for 67% of Americans across color lines, across gender lines, across age lines. 67% of Americans are feeling stressed based on this, the situation that we're facing as Americans. More than a third of Americans have displayed clinical signs of anxiety, depression, both since the coronavirus pandemic has began. And here's the thing. It doesn't necessarily suggest that these folks have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression. They're just displaying the clinical signs much more clearly than they were before. That's interesting to take note of. Only 50% of employees feel comfortable discussing mental health issues. The stigma that surrounds mental illness and mental health is so great that it oftentimes prevents people from getting the support that they need. And the long-term psychological consequences can last beyond, can last beyond 10 years. And that's to speak to some of the trauma pieces that come with a pandemic. But to go up one that I skipped over, that nearly 1 in 5 Americans, I thought this was fascinating. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans say that they've had a physical reaction when thinking about an outbreak, the pandemic outbreak, as well as our society. That one causes a lot of, it causes a lot of conversation or discussion when you think about how people feel related to what's happening today. I can remember distinctly talking to people in session after a big political event would happen, and they would come into session not to talk about any other conversation but that political event, or not necessarily having the space to talk about things within your home, because maybe most folks are relatively young and you're the oldest in the home and they can't understand some of the layered concepts that you're dealing with at work or what have you. And so we've been seeing an uptick of people coming into the offices to talk about things that are related to their physical responses to what's happening in our society. Here's another interactive moment. I want you to, as this next slide shows, I want you to type into the conversation, what immediately comes to your mind when you see these two images? What comes to your mind? Both the image on the left and the image on the right. What comes to mind when those images? Stress and contemplation.
I'm sorry.
Stress and contemplation, absolutely. Overwhelmed. Image on the right is exactly what I felt. Stress and fragmentation, pain, walls are closing in. Stress and isolation, yeah, absolutely. Entrapment, yeah, it trapped on the left. What you're identifying are the exact sentiments that people have been feeling over the past 9 months. And what ends up happening oftentimes when people are starting to experience or start to manifest psychosomatically the experience of being trapped and overwhelmed, then the development of very difficult characteristics of mental health disorders start to expand. What's interesting to see is this is not only general public of people dealing with situations. This is oftentimes people who are working on the front lines and trying to decide what information should go out and what information should stay back. What kinds of things should I do, or what kind of things should I avoid? When you talk to people who are on the front lines of, whether it's you, which are on the front lines of communications, or those who are on the front lines on a more health perspective, regardless of the front line that you're on, these images can capture the sentiment that one might feel, whether in the professional realm and even in the personal realm as well. Next slide. Now, we all have had the challenge of having to adjust working from home. There's a general sentiment that used to suggest, if I had the ability to work at home, hey, we'd be great. This would be so much easier and life would be fun. But nobody realized how long this would last, or that it would be 9 months that it would be the case. 71% of employers, according to the Human Resource Management Survey, Society of Human Resource Management, 71% of employers say that adapting to remote work has been a challenge. I currently am at home doing this work, and it has impacted the quality of work that I do. As a mental health clinician, telehealth is an aspect of the work that we did or what we do. But at this stage, or at this point, what used to be novelty for us is now a necessity. It is really difficult, and I was mentioning this to Ms. Clayton before things got started, that is really difficult for clinicians who are used to watching and paying attention to the most idiosyncratic of behaviors in a clinical office and hearing certain sounds and all of that. Now we're having to deal with the filter of what's happening on video. Now, it doesn't mean that the work gets any less, or it changes, or it's not going to be as efficient or effective, but it does impact the way that we work. So as this 71% is expressed, again, I hope you're hearing how stress continues to mount, and it's through a variety of different events. Next slide. When things like this, when bringing work home is the order of the day, not just the option or opportunity that you have, when it's the order of the day, it can lead to what we consider or call occupational burnout. The World Health Organization has distinctly identified occupational burnout as underneath one of the categories of potentially world diseases. And what burnout is literally a syndrome that's conceptualized from chronic workplace stress. Please don't raise your hands, because I'm sure that if I have you raise your hands and tell me that work sometimes gets stressful, and it can be chronically stressful, then you will, you definitely can identify or resonate with some of this conversation. And burnout is not just simply, I'm tired of it today, or it doesn't feel as good today. Burnout is when it's characterized by 3 specific dimensions. Feelings of energy depletion, or if you find yourself saying, I am exhausted. Now, on Fridays, it's not uncommon that folks say, whew, I'm glad that work's over. I get to enjoy the weekend, what have you. But when you work from home, very often when the time gets rearranged or mismanaged, or you have to switch this time to do this and move this here, and you might have to work some on Saturday and a little bit on Sunday, you can easily renegotiate what you used to accept as vacation or relaxation time, and now you have one continuous stream of work. So feelings of energy depletion and exhaustion. This one is important. increased mental distance from your job, or consistently feeling negative and cynical related to job. Now, sarcasm is the order of the day. Oftentimes we have people who use cynicism and sarcasm to make light of environments or work. But when it's the consistent conversation, it is generally categorized as a part of perhaps feeling burned out in the work that you're doing. Of course, the next and the final dimension is a reduced professional efficacy. You just don't do it as well as you originally set out to do. You find yourself missing the mark on a variety of different things, and occupational burnout has no rules on who it affects. It affects anyone who does not necessarily take the time to rest, recharge, and rejuvenate to get back into the work that they do, even if they're working from home. Next slide. More than half of Americans say that news and other media has created stress to the degree of fatigue or sleep loss. I don't know if many of you paid attention to the last week and a half of our lives, and you were hanging on by a thread to find out results, to find out if your local or your national candidate has won. But the amount of stress and exhaustion that happened within that time frame for people that were invested in the results is reflected in this sentiment here. 1 in 10 adults. Now this one is probably, I think the number is undershot here. I believe it's a lot higher. 1 in 10 adults check the news every hour. And fully 20% of Americans report constantly monitoring their social media feeds. We're going to address social media in a smidget in a moment, which often exposes them to the latest news headlines, whether they like it or not. Now, here's the challenge. That 1 in 10, I think the number is a lot higher, and I'm going to tell you why. How many of you have this thing here? You see it? Yep, mobile device. How many times does that thing alert you to when something is happening? And how many times an hour does it alert you? Now, I know, tell the truth, you're communication professionals. So this is something that you probably see on a regular basis. You all could probably be our outliers, but the reality is this is a much more intensive situation than we think. USA Today did an article not too long ago that said this here, we touch, handle, and hold our mobile devices more. This is a sobering statistic. We touch, handle, and hold our mobile devices more than we touch, handle, and hold the people that we love. Wow. That bugs me to no end. And we touch this or hold it in our hands, the equivalent of a part-time job. So the average of something about 15 to 16 hours a week. Next slide, please. So just to address the social media conversation very quickly, there's always been a correlation between social media and depression. And the correlation conversation is fair, but the causation conversation is not fair. So here's what I mean. Correlation means two things relate to one another. Causation means one thing causes the other. So social media does not cause depression, but what does happen is the way that we internalize these events is what can create the symptomatic nature of depression. And this research done by the Pew Research basically gives us the conversation related to the factors that have digital technologies and how we interpret this. This information will say that social media users don't necessarily have higher levels of stress. Don't necessarily have higher levels of stress. But at the same time, if you are a social media user and you internalize the events, you do have an increased awareness of stressful events in other people's lives. Therefore, it can create stressful situations and perhaps even depressive symptoms. So again, it's not that it causes the stress, it just demonstrates the relationship between stress, which you'll see on this next slide. That the relationship between stress and social media use is indirect. It is the social uses of digital technologies and the way that they increase awareness of distressing events in other people's lives. And that explains how or why people are experiencing more stress. With that said, I'm seeing conversation in the chat that's happening that's basically saying, listen, I put my phone down on purpose. I hide it, I put it away, and I set certain timers so that I'm not involved in social interactions in terms of media or engaged too much that way because I don't need to experience that stress. So for the sake of the conversation, keep sending in those messages to each other, because that kind of best practice will help people move forward when they need to. Next slide. This basically is a graphic, and hopefully you guys will get a chance to keep the PowerPoint. This graphic basically shows technology users and how ingrained they are in that technology and what the impact of that is in their in everybody's life or their current life. So the Pew Research Center presented this research in 2016. So it'd be worthwhile to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So what we've noticed in terms of significant increases, fear and worry about our own health, the health of our loved ones, of course, with coronavirus symptomology, financial situation, loss of a job, or loss of support services that we rely on. Clinicians are seeing a rise in that. Changes in sleep or eating patterns. Even though you may be at home for a longer period of time, you may not be eating as often, or you may not be sleeping as appropriately. The worsening of chronic health problems because of the lack of access to healthcare or limited access, worsening mental health conditions, increased use of tobacco and alcohol and other substances. Next slide. And if you want to be able to identify significant signs, these are not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the most salient situations that you'd probably be able to notice among coworkers, colleagues, friends, family. If you notice that there's persistent anxiety or the mood has changed significantly, if they're highly reactive, withdrawn and isolative, which is different than solitudinous. Withdrawn and isolative is a separation from society without an intent to rejoin, while solitude has the intention of rejoining. Lethargic, not being able to motivate, deterioration of personal hygiene. And that doesn't necessarily mean sweatpants during Zoom meetings. If you've got sweatpants on, that's all right. If you've got a nice top and just got shorts on, I understand. It's kind of the convenience of things. Deterioration simply means they're not bathing or not showering, and it's not for any religious purpose, and it's creating a challenge. Illegal use of drugs and alcohol at work situations, interpersonal problems, continuous conflicts, suicidal thoughts and gestures. All of these are significant warning signs when it comes to recognizing the challenges of mental health. This was thrown in just for kicks, but I thought it was significant to share that information overload is a symptom of our desire not to focus on what's important in the moment. It's a choice. We have a decision to make when it comes to being able to take in all of this information, which could create the onslaught of those symptoms that we were just mentioning. So you have a decision and you have the ability to be healthy and stay and remain healthy. Next slide. Now, this is true among all of you, not the skydiving piece unless you do. And if you do, call me, I'd love to go. But Dr. Holman has shared some thoughts with you and said that if your work requires that you engage frequent with media stories, especially if they have graphic violence, etc., We've got to build stress relieving activities in your routine so that you can counteract those negative effects. Counteracting those negative effects help to solidify your mental health, which looks like this. What does it mean to be mentally healthy or emotionally healthy? This is the category that you would want to be striving for. This is kind of the checklist, the general checklist, if you want to double check to make sure that you are hitting the markers of health. Number one, the ability to just enjoy life despite the current situation. The ability to have a productive life. Ability to achieve work-life balance. That's work-life balance. Achieve the ability to cope with stressors. The ability to, now check this this third to last one out, the ability to adapt to sudden changes. I showed you that the date on the birth of my daughters was 2/19. The first quarantine date was literally about 2 weeks later. Sudden changes. Nobody was really prepared for it. We heard about it, but sudden changes. Hallmark movies improve my mental health, and they also can create other stuff too. Having self-awareness and the ability to regulate emotions. Emotion regulation is key. Also resilience to deal with distress. This, if you want to have a short litmus test of whether or not emotional or mental health is where you are, this is a good one to see. And Hallmark movies are really good feel-good movies, so I support them. Next slide. So what are some of the things that you've got to be able to do or consistently try to do? And before I give you, there's three sets of these that I want to make sure I give you. I don't want you to try them all at once. Best practice is practice one of these things at a time. All right, first one, self-management. You've got to laugh more. Research suggests that there's 3 great benefits that you have. Number one, your overall neurology starts to increase. Number 2, you burn calories when you laugh. And last but not least, your overall disposition can last stronger for 2 to 3 days. One strong day of laughing will help to give you greater endorphin effects for about 2 to 3 days. Do something you enjoy every day, not just on the weekends. Avoid worry and negative talk. I love what Mark Twain says. Mark Twain said that he has been through so many things in his life, and some of them actually happened. Food for thought. Meditation and mindfulness, growing tremendously in practice. Pick your battles. Think about what it is that you want to fight with, fight against. Spend time with family and friends. Even if it's virtually, it is worthwhile. Next slide. Health. Do your absolute best to eat a balanced, nutritious diet. I've unfortunately done, I've done pretty good with balanced, nutritious diets, but I will tell you, I have absolutely loved my share of takeout during this time as well. So, and they don't always have the best choices. Water. We should be certainly, we certainly should be drinking half of our body weight in ounces of water each day. If you're not there, just start with 8 and start to steadily increase during there. Playing disc golf, yes, that's a good one. You're outdoors and you're getting to take it all in. Exercise a minimum of 20 minutes a day, even if it's walking in place, it counts. I think the Surgeon General's recommendation now has gone down to 15 minutes just to make sure we can get it in. Have compassion for yourself. Yes, compassion is a health matter. Sleep 7 to 8 hours a night. I know what that sounds like, but there's Matthew Walker does some amazing research when it comes to sleep. Make sure that you're sleeping at least that amount because it does do a tremendous amount of restorative properties to your brain and your body health. And I understand a glass of wine is what you might enjoy, but please drink responsibly. Next slide. When it comes to your professional prioritizations, prioritize yourself, then work. Again, if there is no healthy self for self, there can be no healthy self for anyone else. So prioritize yourself, then work. Set time limits for everything that you do. Delegate as many of the tasks that you can. Speak up about your expectations and needs. Put a star next to that. Put underline it, circle it. You want to make sure that people understand that if you're in need of support or help, please make sure that you let folks know. Be flexible. If there's anything that this time frame has taught us, it has taught us how important it is for us to be flexible. It also has taught us to be aware of our limits and know our boundaries. When we're aware of our limits and boundaries, we know what to expect from ourselves, and we know what boundaries to set for other people. When it comes to managing information, I see that you already started some of that conversation in the chat. Here are some information recommendations. Feel free to ignore information. I know what that sounds like to communication professionals, but recognize you can't consume every drop of information out there. Even if you're responsible for disseminating a majority of it, you've got to be clear that there's some information that you're going to have to stay away from or take a distance from or take some break from. And don't feel guilty for ignoring it. Feel free to take action without all the facts, but you want to ask yourself first, what's the worst that can happen with that? Number two, number three, create an information queue and tackle it on a regular basis. Next slide, please. Filter information vigorously. Make sure you're filtering it as much as you can and primarily deal with what's relevant and important. Again, that word delegate is very, very key. Don't take on responsibility for knowing everything, and let people who are specialized in specific areas, let them use their understanding. Learn to skim information. Many of us did great at that when it came to undergraduate institutions. Skim information, get the key points, and sometimes move on. These are opportunities for resource and support. A majority of these lines have, a lot of these have chat lines that you could either type into, text into, or you can directly call. When you need immediate help in a crisis, these are great resources. And if these will be disseminated later, it'll be awesome for you to be able to share. I tried to put a variety according to the kind of backgrounds that you all, you work in a variety of different places or spaces. So I wanted to make sure I put a good variety there. And of course, always check for your local clinicians who are ready and willing at the helm to support your needs. There were a few questions that I saw pop up in the chat, and while presenting, I wasn't able to address all of them in discussion, but I know we have a few minutes left. If we can address maybe 2 or 3 of those, then I think that would be a great use of the time.
Yes, and can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you fine.
Okay, and if everybody can give us a few minutes, I know we started a few minutes late, we would love to address some of the questions in the chat and have an opportunity now for you to ask Napoleon some questions. And I'm just gonna scroll up. For one thing, if you would like these slides, Napoleon, is it okay if I send our guests your fabulous PowerPoint presentation?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, so if you would like the slides, I can make it simple. Shoot me an email, I put it in the chat, and I can forward you the presentation so you can have that. It's Chiara, my first name, and then Chanel, my middle name, 08@gmail.com. It's in the chat. If you want to just shoot me an email, I can respond and send you those slides. But we had a question about addressing mental health of folks that report to you. So do you have any situations from that? Maybe show them this PowerPoint presentation, or what do you think, Napoleon?
Well, that would be awesome to have some of this stuff on hand. But I think the most important thing is being available to people help to make them feel comfortable and trust any decisions that you make with them. So your availability and concern for their health lets them know that whatever you suggest would be something that would be good. What I would encourage you to suggest is, number one, I don't want you to spend any time trying to assess the issue. Spend as much time as you can just helping them understand that you're there to support them. And if they need any extended support, direct them to whatever programs you might have on the job, like EAP programs or other supportive networks. I've done workshops for EAP programs who have phenomenal resources. So I would encourage you to direct them there and give them the suggestion or offer if they're interested in getting any mental health support. Have them, you can direct them to Psychology Today, which is a clearinghouse for all kinds of therapists, and they can make a selection from there. So hopefully that is hopefully that's a good situation to start with. But first and most important, show them that you care, and not without overstepping the bounds.
Perfect, thank you. And people have just been giving suggestions of what they've been doing. And Krista, who is a fabulous member of the ComNetworkDETROIT leadership, local leader team, says as a comm professional, she feels like she's not doing her job sometimes. I believe it was in reference to when you said not taking in everything, but she doesn't immerse herself in daily headlines. She does short podcasts to give a good sense of news without getting going too deep in. So that's a good suggestion. And any other questions, pop them in the chat. Marty, please shoot me an email so I can get you the presentation. I know you've asked for it a few times. I want to get that to you. So I think that's really it. I'm just going back up through the chat. If anybody has any other questions or comments, I loved all the conversation within. And while we're waiting for a couple of more questions, I don't see any. I just want to take this opportunity to give a quick shout out to ComNet while we still have most people on the call, and just thank everybody for joining us. And in case you want to stay connected with us, we have a couple ways. If you're on Facebook, please join our Facebook group. It's ComNetworkDETROIT. You have to be added in. We do ask you a couple questions, but we share a lot of information, job leads, good content, good articles, and then also what our meetups are going to be in the information. And if you're new to us, we're a communication network that exists to connect folks working on communications for good. So that's what we that's what we say we do. We have over 1,600 members across the country, 80% of whom hold leadership positions in their organization. So your local ComNet team for Detroit, I want to definitely give a shout out because I know quite a few of us are on here. So I want to thank them for allowing me to participate and to organize this, but I want to give a shout out to Krista, who works with the Kresge Foundation, Emily, who works for Fair Food Network, Natalie, who works for the Skillman Foundation, and Jack, who works for 3 Spot. So we are your local ComNetworkDETROIT team. And I don't even think I introduced myself. I'm Chiara Clayton. I'm with the Area Agency on Aging 1B, and I'm the newest member of the ComNetDETROIT crew. So just wanted to give that shout out really quick. So someone else asked, curious if folks have been updating work deadlines and milestones, or how you can give colleagues more space when they need it. So that came from Carrie, who's also part of our ComNet family. Do you have a book or podcast recommendations for coworkers and employees who may need help finding hope and positivity right now? So Napoleon, do you have any books or podcasts? I know. Or if anybody else in the chat has any that they use, to put them in there too.
Yeah, Krista just beat me to one of my favorite ladies. I'm a fan of courage and the word courage. So Brene Brown has a remarkable podcast. I listened a lot to Malcolm Gladwell. That's not necessarily about like uplifting positivity, but it's about critical thinking and making decisions, etc. If you're interested in emailing me, I'd be more than happy to share my email address so that folks can email me and I can share, after giving it a little bit more thought, I can give you some best practice things to do that are specific. So like, for example, I do have a book list that I could send you that for a variety of different situations. So if somebody's dealing with anger, frustration, and things like that, I can email that to you. My email address, hopefully I can do that here. Is that okay?
Yes, I was actually gonna, as you said it, I was gonna type it in for you.
Oh, perfect. It's NHARRINGTON in Harrington at ambassadorcounseling.com, ambassadorcounseling.com.
I should know how to spell. I'm going to make sure that's right, but I got you, ambassadorcounseling.com. And really quickly, because we're running out of a little bit of time, just any shout outs or plugs or anything, Napoleon, that you want to give, social handles, anything, so people can actually keep up with you and what you're doing.
Sure. Feel free to connect with me on Twitter. My handle is @nharrington Jr. On Instagram, I'm known as the Courage Counselors. You also will be able to sneak a peek of those two little ladies, and the tall lady that's with me. So @Courage Counselor, and on Facebook, feel free to connect. It's Napoleon Harrington. So those are my my socials, and you can always check out what's happening from a therapeutic standpoint at www.ambassadorcounseling.com.
Perfect. And I actually put your email address, I believe I spelled that correctly, in the chat. And everybody, shoot me an email if you want his, or you can actually just email him. He can send you his slides as well. But I believe that is all the time we have. No more questions in the chat. So again, just thank you on behalf of ComNetwork Detroit. Keep up with us on Facebook. Please join our mailing list. If you got this invitation, hopefully you're on the mailing list. Look out for our next meetup next month. You'll be getting information about this. Unfortunately, no, there's no CEUs that we're offering for this, Marty. This was just really conversational and informational for you. But again, thank you so much to everybody. Shout out to my ComNetwork local leaders. You guys have a great day, a great weekend. Napoleon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I feel proud to have gone to the same school that you went to as well.
You went to a really—
We did all right, right? We did all right, right?
We did.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Be blessed. Good day. Bye-bye.